Rain tapped against the rusted tin roof of the small white house on Rosewood Lane, a forgotten corner of rural Indiana. The yard was overgrown, wild with thistles and creeping vines. In an old mailbox leaned sideways, the name Dr. Benjamin Granger, stenciled in faded black paint. From the outside, it looked like a place time had given up on, except for one thing, the man inside. Dr. Benjamin Granger was known around town as the retired brain surgeon who'd once worked at Johns Hopkins. That's what he told people anyway. Tall, soft-spoken, always in a pressed white shirt and polished shoes, he carried the air of someone important. He spoke with confidence, used medical terms in everyday conversation, and told stories that left people in awe. Most never questioned it. They trusted him until the scream started. It was a cool Sunday morning in April when the neighbors heard it. A high-pitched scream, short and sharp, like something torn out of a horror movie, shattered the quiet hum of birdsong. Mrs. Kelly, who lived 3 houses down, looked out her kitchen window just in time to see a shadow dart across Dr. Granger's backyard. She thought about calling the police. She didn't. 3 days later, the smell started. The wind carried it through the neighborhood, a heavy, rotten stench that made people wrinkle their noses and shut their windows. It was strongest near Granger's house. By Thursday, someone finally called it in. Detective Sam Rourke had been with the Indiana State Police for over 20 years. He was the kind of man you didn't lie to, because somehow he'd always know. With salt and pepper hair, a tired gaze, and a voice like sandpaper, Rourke was the one they called when cases got messy, and this one smelled real messy. He arrived on Rosewood Lane that Friday morning in an unmarked Dodge Charger, coffee in one hand, notepad in the other. The moment he stepped out, the smell hit him like a slap. Jesus, he muttered, covering his nose with his sleeve. Uniformed officers were already on site. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off the perimeter of the backyard. A forensic team had set up under a white canopy, their gloved hands moving steadily through dirt and decay. "What do we got?" Rourke asked. Officer Mel Torres pointed toward the back of the yard, where a shallow pit had been dug behind a half-dead oak tree. "Neighbor called in a smell. We found what looks like human remains, bones mostly, some skin tissue, buried in trash bags wrapped in plastic. There's more. We haven't even finished digging." Rourke stared at the pit for a long time. "Where's Granger?" "Inside. Says he's got no idea how anything got buried in his backyard." Rourke raised an eyebrow. "Of course he doesn't." Dr. Benjamin Granger sat at his kitchen table, his hands folded neatly in front of him, a porcelain cup of black tea steaming beside him. He didn't look rattled. He didn't look concerned. In fact, he looked more annoyed than anything else. "This is absurd," he said calmly, meeting Rourke's eyes. "I've lived here for 12 years. I'm a man of medicine. Why would I bury a body in my own yard?" Rourke leaned against the counter, studying him. "That's what we're trying to find out." Granger chuckled, a short, controlled sound. "I suspect you'll be wasting your time. I've had gardeners, tenants, even a handyman or two over the years. Any of them could have done something unsavory." Rourke scribbled a note, then looked up. "You still practicing, Doc?" "No," Granger replied. "Retired 5 years ago. Spent most of my career in Baltimore. I was a neurosurgeon. You got any proof of that?" Granger blinked. "Excuse me? Medical license, hospital records, photos of you in scrubs, anything that proves you're who you say you are?" Granger stiffened. "I don't have to prove anything unless I'm under arrest." "Not yet," Rourke said, pushing off the counter. "But we'll see where this goes." By nightfall, they'd unearthed 4 more bodies, all dismembered, all wrapped the same way. Forensics estimated the burials spanned over a decade. One skull had a gold crown on a molar. Another was missing a left hand. They were going to need DNA. Back at headquarters, Rourke ordered a full background check on Benjamin Granger. It came back strange. A driver's license issued in 2007. No record before that. No medical license under that name. No degree from Johns Hopkins. No tax records from before he moved to Indiana. He didn't exist, at least not as a surgeon. That night, Rourke sat at his desk, staring at the results. "He's a ghost," he muttered. "If Benjamin Granger wasn't a doctor, then who the hell was he? And who was buried in his backyard?" Detective Sam Rourke sat in the pale light of his office, the hum of a busted overhead light flickering now and then like a broken heartbeat. He stared at the screen, scrolling through the public databases again. No Benjamin Granger in any national registry of licensed physicians, no trace of a medical degree, no yearbook photos, no research papers, nothing. It didn't make sense. He rubbed his face with both hands, then leaned back in his chair. Guy walks into a town, claims he's a world-class brain surgeon, and no one checks? Christ. A knock at the door interrupted the silence. It was Special Agent Nora Kent from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. They'd brought her in when the body count hit 5. Thin, sharp-eyed, and always 2 steps ahead, Kent had a reputation for peeling people open without laying a hand on them. "Rourke," she said, dropping a folder on his desk, "I think we just found your doctor." Rourke raised an eyebrow, flipping it open. Inside were photos, mugshots, old arrest records, a booking sheet from a jail in southern Alabama, dated 1994, the name Walter Dean Harrow, charged with fraud, impersonation of a medical professional, and unlawful practice of medicine. Served 6 years, paroled in 2000. He looked nothing like the polished man sipping tea in that quiet Indiana kitchen. Rourke let out a slow whistle. Son of a bitch! Benjamin Granger was a lie. The real man was Walter Harrow, a career con artist with a brilliant mind and a talent for slipping through cracks. Over the years, he'd assumed identities from Texas to Ohio, each time a little more convincing. He learned how to talk like a surgeon, how to act like one, how to even stitch a wound just well enough to fool the untrained eye. Agent Kent leaned over the desk. "Here's where it gets better. We found a similar case in Tennessee. Woman vanished in 2009. Last seen with a man named Ben Grady. Bought her a drink, offered her free consultation for migraines. Sound familiar?" Rourke nodded. "And I'm guessing that name doesn't show up in any hospital database either." "Nope. But get this. We pulled DNA from one of the bodies in the backyard. It matches a missing person in Memphis. That woman, Hannah Lister." Rourke stood up. "We've got him." "Not yet," Kent said, lowering her voice. "He still doesn't know we know." They returned to the White House on Rosewood Lane just after dawn. A warrant in hand, they stepped inside without waiting for permission. Granger, Harrow, was in the kitchen again, reading a medical journal like nothing was wrong. Rourke tossed the folder onto the table. "Morning, Doc." Granger looked up, his expression unreadable. "We've been busy," Rourke continued. "You've got quite the resume. Walter Dean Harrow, Alabama State Prison, fraud, impersonation. I gotta say, the Granger Act? Damn convincing." Granger closed the journal gently. "You've made a mistake." Kent stepped forward. "Did we? Because one of the bodies in your yard belonged to Hannah Lister. You remember her? Said she had migraines. You told her you could fix it. There was a flicker, barely visible, but there. A tight clench of his jaw, a twitch in his eye." Granger stood slowly. "I want a lawyer, of course you do," Rourke said. "But you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, and we're holding you for questioning related to five murders. And if you think this is going to be easy, Doc, you're about to learn what real pressure feels like." Back at the station, the interviews began. Granger sat stone-faced in the interrogation room. The walls were cold steel gray, the only sound the quiet tick of the wall clock behind him. "You know," Rourke said, leaning forward, "I've met killers before. Some panic, some cry, some brag. But you're different. You're patient, like a man who's done this before, like a man who planned this down to the second." Granger didn't speak. Kent placed a photo on the table. It showed a young woman with strawberry blonde hair and a bright smile. "This is Hannah. She was 26. Loved art. Had a little sister. That sister still asks every year what happened to her." Granger looked at the photo, then turned his eyes away. "You want to play the long game?" Rourke said. "Fine. But we're going to find everything. We're going to dig up every square inch of your past. We're going to find who you really were before you became Walter Harrow. And by the time we're done, you'll wish you'd stayed in prison." Meanwhile, the forensic teams uncovered more than just bones. Hidden in the crawl space beneath Granger's home, they found a trunk filled with old ID cards, notebooks, even trophies, rings, earrings, watches. Items taken from the victims, each one labeled with a date and a name. Agent Kent photographed each item carefully. "These are his keepsakes," she said. "He wasn't just burying bodies. He was collecting memories." The press got wind of it. By nightfall, the story was all over the news. Fake surgeon caught after. Decade-long killing spree. Pictures of the house flooded social media. Locals showed up to stare through the yellow tape, whispering about the quiet man who once offered to check their blood pressure or look at that strange headache. But one thing still didn't add up. Rourke stood in the pit behind the oak tree, now empty except for wet earth and scattered forensic markers. "If he buried 5 people," he muttered, "what about the 6th bag we pulled?" He turned to Torres. "Run those bones again. Check age, dental records. Something doesn't feel right." Torres hesitated. "Why?" Rourke narrowed his eyes at the tree line. "Because I think one of the bodies buried here wasn't a victim." The air around Rosewood Lane was quiet now. Too quiet. The crowds had cleared, the cameras had packed up, but something still hung in the soil, in the way the trees leaned toward the yard like they were listening. Detective Rourke stood by the tree line, arms crossed, watching forensic techs dig deeper into the area where the 6th body was found. It was different, shallower, less careful, and something about it didn't fit. Back at the forensics lab, Dr. Lena Briggs, the county's lead forensic anthropologist, laid the remains out on a stainless steel table. The body had been decomposed beyond recognition, just bones and clumps of dark hair, but Briggs could already tell it wasn't like the others. "No plastic wrapping," she said. "No binding. No signs of post-mortem dismemberment. This one was buried fast and messy." Rourke leaned in. "Can you tell if it's a man or woman?" "Male, roughly mid-40s to early 50s. Signs of blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. Dental work suggests he wasn't local. Gold filling in the lower molar. Pretty old school. Probably done at least 20 years ago." Kent frowned. "Could it be an accomplice?" Briggs hesitated. "Maybe, but I think this one was personal." Rourke felt it in his gut. The other victims were women, all killed with precision, wrapped like medical waste. This man? He was dumped, like an afterthought. No care, no pride. And then Torres burst into the room. "We got something. The ID from that old trunk." He handed them a cracked leather wallet, pulled from the crawl space. Inside was a driver's license issued in 1996 to a doctor. Philip Monroe, a neurologist. Address, Baltimore, Maryland. Kent's eyes widened. Philip Monroe. That's a real doctor, licensed. Practiced at Johns Hopkins until he went missing in 2008. Rourke turned to Briggs. "Could your mystery man be Monroe?" Briggs nodded. "With a sample of his dental records, we can confirm it." Rourke clenched his jaw. So Harrow didn't just fake being a doctor. He killed the one he impersonated. They pulled everything they could find on Dr. Philip Monroe. Respected, clean record, published in several journals. Went missing after a medical conference in Atlanta. His wife filed a missing persons report, but nothing ever came of it. Last known sighting, surveillance footage from a hotel lobby. He left with a man who fit Harrow's build, though the footage was grainy. Kent laid out the theory. He probably met Monroe, studied him, maybe even gained his trust. Killed him, took his identity, moved here, and became the man himself. Jesus, Rourke muttered. That's not just impersonation. That's full-on life theft. Back in the interrogation room, Harrow sat alone, hands cuffed to the table. Still calm. Still wearing that faint smirk like he was in control of the entire game. Rourke walked in with the wallet and the photo of Dr. Monroe. "Recognize this guy?" Harrow glanced at the photo, then shrugged. "His name's Dr. Philip Monroe. You killed him, took his wallet, his name, his life." "I have the right to remain silent," Harrow said smoothly. "Yeah," Rourke said, dropping the wallet on the table. "But we both know silence won't save you now." He stepped back. "We found Monroe's body in your yard. We know you weren't the surgeon. You were the shadow. Kent entered next, holding a file thick with documents. Here's what you stole. Medical credentials, a name, respect. You took what you couldn't earn, and then you buried the man like trash. Harrow said nothing, but his fingers twitched. That was the crack they needed. Later that night, Rourke and Kent sat in his office going over every name in the old notebooks they'd pulled from the crawl space. Some were initials, some full names, dates beside each one. This one, Kent said, pointing to a line. DL, 2013. That doesn't match any of the bodies we found. Neither does this, Rourke added. SR, 2010. Some of these names might still be missing persons. We could be looking at a total victim count over 10. And they're not all women, Kent said. This one, AH, was a man, a mechanic from Cleveland. Went missing in 2015. Confirmed sighting of him in Indiana that same year. Rourke closed the file, slowly. He was hunting people. Not just women, people he could trick, people who trusted too easily. Kent nodded. People who wouldn't be missed right away. They stared at the board covered in names, photos, timelines. And then Kent said it. This guy isn't just a serial killer. He's a predator of identity. The next morning, the lab confirmed it. Dental records matched. The unnamed body was Dr. Philip Monroe, the real doctor, the real man Harrow had buried and replaced. Rourke stood beside the pit one last time, rain falling in sheets, soaking the loose earth. He wanted to be someone so badly, he said quietly. He became a surgeon by killing one. Inside the prison holding cell, Harrow stared at the wall. No smirk now, no calm, just silence. Because the truth had finally surfaced, and it had been buried in his own backyard. The storm had passed, but the air in Indiana was still thick with unease. In every corner of the state, newspapers carried the same haunting headline. Doctor of Death, the con man who buried the truth. At the Indiana State Police headquarters, the squad room was buzzing with activity. Phones rang off the hook. Reporters camped outside. Cold case detectives sent in requests, hoping to tie their long-forgotten victims to the now unmasked Walter Harrow. Detective Rourke, however, was focused. He stood at the evidence board, red string connecting names to cities, pins driven into maps like stab wounds. One thing became clear as he traced the lines with his eyes. Harrow had been moving for years, staying just long enough to build a new identity, find his next target, and erase the tracks behind him. But it was the names in the notebook that haunted Rourke the most. Some of them were familiar, some weren't in any database. No missing persons reports, no police records, like they'd simply vanished without anyone noticing. And that's what bothered him. Agent Kent walked in with a manila envelope. Got a lead from Ohio. Local PD thinks they found another connection. Woman named Grace Vaughn disappeared in 2011. Last known contact was a Craigslist ad, seeking medical help for migraines. You seeing the pattern? Yeah, Rourke said. Same bait every time. Neurological problems, headaches, something vague, non-life-threatening, that wouldn't immediately send a person to a hospital. Kent handed him a photo of Grace. She was young, early 30s, with glasses and a soft smile. Same story as Hannah Lister. She thought she was going in for a private consult, never seen again. Rourke studied the photo. We need to exhume the entire backyard, every inch. It's already in motion. We've got cadaver dogs sweeping the tree line, and Kent lowered her voice. We're pulling soil samples. Some spots show signs of decomposition that aren't accounted for by the bodies we found so far. Rourke nodded. He buried more than bones out there. At the dig site, the ground was a maze of flagged markers and shallow trenches. Technicians moved like ants, carefully brushing away layers of dirt. Midday sun baked the ground dry, making it harder to distinguish disturbed soil from natural layering. And then they found it, 6 feet beyond the oak tree. A locked metal box, rusted at the corners, about the size of a briefcase. No obvious markings. But when they forced it open, the smell of mildew and time hit hard. Inside were papers, dozens of them. Letters, ID's passport photos, pages from medical textbooks with scribbled notes in the margins. A bundle of hair tied with a red ribbon. Kent put on gloves and picked up the top page. It was a handwritten letter. To whoever finds this, my name is Sarah Monroe. My husband was taken from me. His name was Philip. If you find this, you found him too. He was kind. Too kind. That's how he died. She looked at Rourke, stunned. His wife. She knew. The box held more. A small journal written by Sarah Monroe in shaky cursive. It chronicled her suspicions, her private investigation after the police gave up. How she drove from Maryland to Indiana in 2010, tracked a man who looked like her husband, and vanished. There was no record of her after that. Kent's voice was low. Rourke, I think she came here, and I think Harrow killed her too. The next day, another body was recovered. Female, late 30s, dark hair, buried deeper than the others, wrapped differently. No care taken. Rourke stared at the scene as the coroner zipped the black bag. Sarah Monroe, the last witness. He knew the timeline now. Harrow didn't just impersonate Monroe. He stalked him, learned his life, killed him. And when Sarah came too close, he ended her too. Just another chapter buried beneath the trees. Back at the station, Rourke and Kent confronted Harrow again. This time, they had the journal, the photos, the evidence. You killed her, Kent said, placing the red-ribboned hair bundle on the table. Sarah, she found you. She tried to warn the world. You made sure her voice was never heard. Harrow didn't blink. He sat back in his chair, calm, but his lips parted slightly, just enough for Rourke to catch it. A twitch, the briefest smile. Rourke leaned in. She found the truth, and now we have it. Still, Harrow said nothing, but his eyes flicked to the hair bundle, just for a second, and that was enough. That evening, Rourke sat at his desk, staring at the wall. The case had cracked open, but instead of closure, it brought questions. There were still names in the notebook they hadn't accounted for. Victims without a voice, graves not yet found, and Harrow wasn't talking. He buried more than bodies, Rourke whispered. He buried history. Kent entered, weary but determined. We'll find them. Rourke nodded slowly. We'll dig up every lie he ever told. And with that, he picked up a red marker and drew a new circle on the board, around a name that hadn't come up in any report yet. LM-2012. Another ghost, another life stolen, and they were far from done. The rain returned that night, falling in long, silent sheets over Rosewood Lane. The wind rattled loose shutters on the White House that once belonged to Dr. Granger. Now it stood as a crime scene, a monument to deception. A constant reminder that monsters don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they wear pressed shirts and offer to help. Inside Indiana State Police HQ, Rourke stood at the center of a storm of evidence. A map of the Midwest covered the far wall, dotted with red pins, each a confirmed or suspected victim. As the notebook names were cross-referenced with missing person cases and cold files, the list grew longer. Too long. Ken approached, carrying a fresh batch of files. You might want to sit for this. Rourke didn't. He just waited, jaw set, eyes heavy. She handed him the top file. Name's Lisa Manning. Disappeared in 2012 from Fort Wayne. Former nurse. Worked private home care for wealthy clients. Her last patient? A man listed as Dr. Ben Granger. Rourke opened the file. A smiling woman stared back at him from her ID badge. Blonde, mid-40s. 2 kids. She made the mistake of working too close, he muttered. Kent nodded. There's more. Her phone last pinged near Granger's property, then nothing. Vanished. No body, no trace. Husband said she got a weird vibe from her last employer. Told him if she didn't check in after her next shift, call the cops. He waited too long. Rourke pinched the bridge of his nose. Let me guess, never officially linked to Harrow? Nope. Until now. In the meantime, forensics continued the exhumation behind the Granger property. The backyard had become a battlefield. Craters of churned-up dirt, yellow flags poking from the soil, and investigators working in silence as the earth gave up its secrets. 2 more skeletons were uncovered, one male, one female. Based on decomposition, Both were buried within the last 10 years. This guy's backyard is a damn graveyard, Torres said as he helped set up the perimeter for the latest dig. He didn't just kill, he stored his history here. They sent the bones for analysis. Hours later, dental records confirmed what Rourke feared. One of the bodies was Lisa Manning. Rourke sat with the file in hand, staring at the name scribbled in Harrow's notebook. LM-2012. Next to it, a small star. He kept track of them like trophies, Kent said. Yeah, Rourke replied. But the star means something. They went back through the notebook. Of the 16 names in it, 5 had stars beside them. 4 of those were already confirmed victims. Each one someone who had gotten too close to discovering Harrow's real identity. Hannah Lister, Sarah Monroe, Lisa Manning, A.H., Alan Hyde, a journalist from Ohio who'd written a blog series on medical fraud and disappeared mid-investigation. That left one starred name unaccounted for. TR-2016 Kent brought up databases, missing persons reports, no hits. What if he used aliases for some of the entries? She asked. Rourke scanned the name again. TR could be initials or a fake. Then it clicked. What if it wasn't a victim? Kent looked up. You think it's an accomplice? Possibly, or someone who helped him, maybe unknowingly. They dug deeper into property records, service calls, utilities. Found something interesting. In 2016, a man named Thomas Rayner had applied for a permit to build an underground storage shed on Granger's property. He was listed as a contractor, no criminal record. Vanished 3 weeks after the job was finished. Kent looked up his profile. No one looked into this guy. No family reported him missing. He was a drifter, took odd jobs off Craigslist. Rourke exhaled slowly. We're going to find him under this house, aren't we? The dig shifted to beneath the house's foundation. Ground-penetrating radar showed a large man-made void, a rectangular space surrounded by concrete. Not just a crawl space, a cellar, hidden, illegal. When they broke through, the stench was overwhelming. Inside were shelves, carefully constructed rows like an archive. Personal belongings, clothing, IDs, small jars of hair. And in the far corner, wrapped in blue tarp, another body, male, mid-30s. Tattoo on the wrist confirmed the identity, Thomas Rayner. Rourke whispered, he built Harrow's graveyard. Kent stepped deeper into the space, flashlight cutting through the darkness. She ran her fingers over the shelving. Look at how careful he was. Every item stored, cleaned, cataloged. This wasn't just about killing. This was about remembering. Rourke stared at a small glass jar. Inside, a necklace with a crucifix. It matched the one worn by Grace Vaughn in her missing persons poster. Monster, he said under his breath. That night, they confronted Harrow again. He'd been in holding for weeks now, refusing to talk. His lawyer was pressing for a mistrial, citing media bias. But Harrow had grown pale, thin, and something in his eyes had changed. Not fear, not guilt, boredom. You know we found the cellar, Rourke said. No response. Thomas Rayner. You starred his name. Why? Silence. Kent placed the notebook on the table. Open to the list. There's only one name left we haven't found. DR 2018. Still nothing. Rourke leaned close. You're going to die in prison, Walter. But if you want your name to be remembered as something other than a coward, this is your shot. Harrow looked at them for the first time and smiled. Dig deeper, he whispered. The words echoed long after Harrow spoke them. Dig deeper. Rourke didn't respond at first. He just stared at Harrow, jaw tight, the hum of the overhead light suddenly louder than everything else in the room. Harrow leaned back in his chair, still cuffed, still grinning like he'd just checkmated them all. You want us to find something? Rourke finally said. Why? Harrow's eyes gleamed. Because some things are too good to stay buried. Back at the Granger house, the scene had changed from a crime scene to a full-scale excavation. A team from the FBI's Forensic Recovery Unit had arrived, bringing ground radar, cadaver dogs, and more than a dozen specialists trained to recover human remains from complex sites. Kent stood with the lead tech beside a computer monitor, showing underground readings from beneath the old cellar. There, the text said, pointing to a black void beneath the main house. That's a second structure, at least 8 by 10 feet, deeper than the cellar we've already uncovered. Likely concrete, maybe reinforced. A bunker? Kent asked. Could be. Or a panic room. It's not on any blueprint. Kent radioed Rourke immediately. By dawn, jackhammers were tearing into the concrete slab beneath the cellar. The noise was deafening. The team worked methodically, layer by layer, until finally a hollow thud. Then a crack. Then air. A hidden hatch. They pried it open. A narrow metal ladder disappeared into darkness. Rourke descended first, flashlight sweeping across the space. The air was damp and still. As his boots hit the floor, he froze. It wasn't a bunker. It was a shrine. The hidden room stretched 15 feet long. The walls were covered in newspaper clippings, photos, even locks of hair pinned like museum pieces. Faces of women, men, handwritten notes scrawled beneath them. She laughed. He cried. Tried to fight. Felt nothing. There were dozens. At the far end of the room was a table, neatly arranged on top. Scalpels, gloves, vials, scalp tags. And in the center, like some unholy centerpiece, was a preserved human heart in a sealed glass jar. A label, Dr. 2018 Kent, stared in horror. He didn't just kill them, he collected them. And in the far corner, another tarp, blood-soaked, rotted. A body curled like it had been thrown there without care. Back at the lab, the ID came in faster this time. Danielle Rivers, missing since August 2018. A veterinary student who had answered an online ad for a research assistant. No family left. No one really pushed the case. Until now. The last name in the notebook. Found. Kent stood over the list. That's 16 names, 16 graves, 16 lives. But Rourke wasn't satisfied. He stared at the list again, counting the names. Then he flipped to the last page. There, at the very bottom, written in a different ink, SR-2005. The beginning. Rourke's voice was low. He started long before we thought. They ran the initials, looked into every missing person from 2005 with those letters, searched hospital records, obituaries, unsolved crimes. After hours of dead ends, Torres made the connection. Sarah Rains, ER nurse, disappeared in Atlanta, 2005. Harrow, still going by Walter Dean. Harrow, then, had checked into the same hospital a week prior. Head trauma. Was discharged the night before she vanished. Kent brought up the missing person report. Rains had been last seen leaving her shift, telling co-workers she was stopping by a patient's house for a follow-up check on a special request. She never came home. Her case went cold within 6 months. Rourke looked up. She wasn't just the first victim. She was the one who gave him the idea, the first medical professional he got close enough to mimic. She was the prototype, Kent added grimly. After her, he realized what he could do. They confronted Harrow again, showed him the photo of Sarah Rains, the report, the timeline. He looked at the image and smiled. She believed in kindness, he said softly. That's what made it easy. Kent slammed her fist on the table. You murdered her to become her, to step into her world. No, he replied. She invited me in. The silence after that was thunderous. With all 16 victims identified, the DA moved to charge Harrow with capital murder in multiple states. But there was a problem. The crimes had occurred across 7 different jurisdictions, some spanning state lines. Each one would require its own trial, its own process. And Harrow's attorney had filed for a federal mental competency hearing. Rourke sat with Kent in his office, drained but not done. They'll drag this out for years, she said. He wants them to, Rourke replied. It's part of the game. Kent sighed. So what do we do now? Rourke looked back at the map, at the pins that marked each life extinguished. We don't let people forget. 3 weeks later, a press conference was held on the courthouse steps in Indianapolis. Flanked by grieving families, detectives, and federal agents, Rourke took the podium. He read the names of each victim out loud, one by one. 16. No headlines, no clickbait, just names, so they wouldn't disappear again. It had been 5 months since Walter Harrow's arrest, and yet the storm that had come with his capture never fully dissipated. The media still pounced on every morsel of information, dragging the case through the mud, parsing every grotesque detail with sick fascination. But Rourke was tired. The adrenaline of the chase had worn off, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. There was no joy in winning this game. There was only relief that it was finally over. Harrow sat behind thick, reinforced glass, still as smug as ever, his eyes gleaming in the sterile white light of the holding room. He had been moved to a maximum security federal facility, awaiting trial for multiple murders across several states. Capital punishment loomed, but that didn't seem to bother him. Harrow thrived on the attention, loved the sensation of being the center of something so monumental. He'd played the system for years, but now it was playing him. Rourke sat at his desk, staring at the paperwork that seemed to pile up endlessly. Kent walked in, a fresh stack of files in hand. "Looks like we're wrapping this up," she said, dropping the files onto Rourke's desk with a thud. "The charges are in. They've got a solid case on him." Rourke didn't look up. "It's not over yet." Kent raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "There's something about Harrow. I don't trust it. He's been playing us the whole time. This whole thing, it's too clean, too easy. I don't think we've hit the bottom yet." "You think there's more?" Kent asked, her tone sharp with disbelief. "What more could there be? 16 victims. He's confessed. His identity's been verified. His methods dissected. The case is airtight." "Maybe," Rourke said, finally looking up at her. "But I can't shake the feeling that he's hiding something. And I'm not going to let this slide until we find out what it is." 3 days later, Rourke returned to the Granger house, this time alone. The evidence that had been collected over the months had been thoroughly sifted through, processed, and cataloged. But something in the back of his mind still pulled him back to the place where it all began. The eerie quiet of the house seemed to echo with unanswered questions. He walked through the overgrown yard, past the half-dismantled garage, and towards the spot where they had uncovered the bodies. The ground had been disturbed, the layers of earth churned up in every direction, but something about the spot under the oak tree still felt wrong. Rourke crouched, his fingers brushing the dirt. There was a chill in the air, but it wasn't from the weather. It was the same unease that had gnawed at him since the day they had first stepped onto this land. He dug, slowly at first, his hands moving carefully over the ground, then more desperately as a sharp glint of metal caught the corner of his eye. He cleared away more dirt, uncovering a small rusted box. His pulse quickened. It was a box of photographs, but these weren't just random pictures. They were Polaroids, old ones, faded around the edges, and on the back of each one, in Harrow's handwriting, was a name and date. But they weren't the names of the victims they had already identified. They were other names, different victims, people who had gone missing in the years before Harrow had been discovered. Names that had never been connected to him, and one stood out among them, a T-2003. Rourke's heart skipped. He knew that name. He knew that case. A young woman, Andrea Thomas. She had been a runaway from Michigan, found in a small town outside of Indianapolis. Her disappearance had been written off as another tragic outcome of a troubled childhood, but Rourke had always wondered. There was something about her case that never sat right with him. He closed the box, his hands trembling. He didn't need to dig further. He already knew. Harrow hadn't just killed. He hadn't just buried the bodies. He'd kept them all, like mementos, like trophies. He'd kept a record of every victim, every kill, and every person who crossed his path, just waiting for the moment to be reminded of them, to relive it all. He hadn't confessed everything. Rourke's heart sank as he made his way back to the station, his mind racing with new implications. If these photographs were real, if they were more victims Harrow had kept hidden, then the horror wasn't over. It never had been. The number of bodies, the number of lives, none of it was accounted for. Rourke called Ken immediately. "We need to talk to Harrow again, right now." Hours later, Harrow was escorted into the interrogation room. His smile was still the same, cool, detached, as though nothing had changed. "What is it now, Detective?" Harrow asked, leaning back in his chair with a false air of innocence. Rourke placed the box of photographs on the table between them. "Tell me about Andrea Thomas," Rourke said flatly. Harrow's eyes flicked to the box, and for the first time, his composure cracked. Just for a second, but it was enough. Rourke didn't wait for him to respond. He pressed on. "You didn't just kill her, did you? You kept a record. You collected people like you were a goddamn historian of death." Harrow shifted in his seat, his lips curling into a twisted grin. "I was a goddamn artist, detective. You just never understood the work." "You're not an artist, Harrow," Rourke spat. "You're a monster." Harrow leaned forward, his smile turning cold. "Everyone's a monster. You just have to know how to see it. I was the one who taught them all how to die." In the weeks that followed, Rourke's worst fears were confirmed. They traced the names and dates from the photographs, and with painstaking effort, identified more victims. They couldn't save them. They were long gone. But they could give their families the answers they'd been searching for. The lies, the disappearances, the unanswered prayers. They finally had a face, a name, and a truth. And Walter Harrow, he was nothing more than a broken man now. His ego had crumbled. His facade of control had disintegrated under the weight of his own past. The trial came and went. It was fast, too fast for the families of the victims who had hoped for some semblance of justice. Harrow was convicted of 16 counts of murder with additional charges related to his history of medical fraud. He was sentenced to death, though it seemed unlikely he'd ever face the needle. His mind had already long been gone. As Rourke sat in the courtroom, he thought about the victims. He thought about all the lost lives, all the wasted years, and for the first time in months, he felt a quiet sense of closure. Walter Harrow died in prison, his name fading into the pages of history. But the legacy he left behind, the lives he destroyed, the trust he violated, would remain. It would remain in the hearts of those who still mourned. And for Detective Rourke, the case was never truly finished. Because no matter how many names they found, no matter how many bodies they uncovered, there was one thing he would never forget. Evil didn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it was hidden in plain sight.